Welcome to episode 51 of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Atoves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're excited to be back to recap our second championship season. Let's get started. We started off this season talking about how we needed to temper our expectations going into this year. We had a tough out-of-conference schedule, and the magic of last year was going to be almost impossible to recreate. But I think after looking back at the year, we can all safely say that this season exceeded our expectations.
Yeah, it felt at times that there was more to this team than last year's team. And, I think there was a lot of debate over which team was much more athletic, which team was better. You kind of, obviously your recency bias will always tell you, it's like, oh, no, this team is better. And I think in many ways it was better. It's just tough to kind of compare Franks, right? You get a pretty good Frank last year, but this season I think Frank just was stellar in many ways that he just wasn't in 2021. And they still were able to put together such a magical season because of it. But I think you've characterized it pretty well, and this is where I want to set up for you is you've characterized this year as gritty and resilient.
Yeah, I mean, last year we used words like magical and historical, and it just seemed like there was so much adversity this year. There were so many injuries that it really just was more of like a tough, grinded out kind of season. And, at the end of the day, we ended up 11-3, which is just really one game off of where we ended up last year.
I mean, going into the bowl game, you win the bowl game and you match last year, and It doesn't feel like it, but
right.
I think it's because of the fact that you actually were able to go through and, do some things this year that you didn't do last season, that you weren't able to, accomplish and maybe left a little unfulfilled. So I think it was a good exit from Conference USA and a good way for us to really move into a new conference as we kind of, have new hopes for not only this season for everybody has, new hopes for 2023, but I think UTSA football in general is going to have some new hopes for what they hope to do in the AAC when they get in there beginning, I'll say July 1st, but technically it's going to be, September when they start playing in the new conference.
I mean, we said it before, it's a lot harder to play with a weight of expectations on your shoulders. And this year, they had so many expectations. They had so much adversity. It just is really impressive to see what they were able to accomplish. And, we still didn't accomplish all of our goals. So we've got a lot to look forward to in the AAC next season.
Yeah, and I think we also talked about the fact that, even though there were some things, there was adversity, like you referenced, there were things that set that up for us to get past them because of what this team did in 2021. Now, they didn't have all the same cast of characters as they did in 2021, but they had most of those characters, and all of them played a part in, making this season, fantastic. And I know we kind of sound like, we're trying to get through this, but it really is more of I think just kind of reflecting and just realizing, let's take a deep breath and go, oof, we did get through that season. It could have been much more disastrous than it really turned out to be.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's talk about some of those great moments for the season, and then we can kind of get into how our season predictions played out or didn't, and then we'll dig into kind of the offense, defense, and special teams and how they, performed overall.
Okay.
Overall, this season, what are some of those top moments that stand out to you?
It feels like you're going to have to dig back, years, months, I guess you can say. I mean, it really is just months, but that first game against Houston, I think a lot of fans are still kind of mourning that loss, the issues that occurred during that game. But the one thing that really stands out and from that game to me is that last second drive. Essentially Frank Harris goes 2 for 3, but puts him in positions to essentially tie the game. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic and did it within, and now I'm blanking on the amount of time, but I believe it was 21 seconds. 21 seconds, you could end up 0-1 after like blowing this huge lead, but you were able to extend it into an overtime, which began a string of overtime games. But still, let's just kind of focus on the fact that Frank, to me, set the stage for this is a different team and we're built differently in that game. And that really stuck out to me as the season kind of wore on, because like I felt like that Houston game set the foundation for how the season's going to go.
Well, it certainly set the foundation for how many last-minute drives that we were going to have to either win the game or put ourselves in position to win the game. But for me, I think the big moments that will stick out to me this season is that North Texas game, the first one. That series from getting the fourth down all the way really through to North Texas, fumbling the kickoff return and us recovering and winning the game. Like that series of, I don't know, maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes, I think that is just the thing that will always stick out in my mind. That incredible catch by Oscar Cardenas. Again, it's like almost like the sequel to the drive from UAB. JT Clark's, amazing catch in the end zone. Like, that is just the thing that I think will stick with me the whole season.
Well, I felt like the Houston game set up that North Texas game, and it was what should have happened in against Houston, which is should have put away Houston and win that game. And, you go back and forth, but yeah, I totally get the North Texas game. It was homecoming. There seemed to be a lot more of excitement in there because a lot of people show up for homecoming, so it certainly was exciting. But I also felt like we've been here before, and this time we're actually going to do it, as opposed to Houston, where we didn't get it done.
Right. Of course, we have to talk about the championship. I mean, back-to-back champions. It's hard to win a championship once. It's hard to win it twice. It's really hard to do it back-to-back.
We kind of hinted at it, when we were doing the previews. We were like, oh, there's going to be a game they're going to drop that they shouldn't drop. Mm-hmm. And there were moments when that could have happened, but UTSA just, even when it was at his most injured, still felt like head and shoulders above everything that Conference USA had to offer.
Yeah.
And some of those tight games, you can go back and forth, and certainly I'll probably use that as an example in a different manner. But, with some of those injuries and with some of the way that it changed how this team had to do certain things, I guess I just never felt like Conference USA was going to be that much of a dogfight. Mm-hmm. I felt like they could get through. But, I mean, I get your point. It's like, it's still difficult to actually come back and win this game again.
Right.
So, I don't want to minimize that either. It's just, it felt like they were tested and they knew that they were better, but they weren't going to be cocky about it. They were just going to actually show on the field that they were better than everybody else.
In addition to those kind of top moments, we had some, moments that we probably wouldn't have predicted at the end of the season. The one that sticks out to me the most is the Army game when the official, I think it was the coin toss going into overtime, and the official flips the coin and hits Rashad in the head with the coin. I mean,
okay, so we were there, and I heard it, but I was like, that's weird. It did not hit me that the coin had hit somebody's helmet.
Right.
Worst, I felt like, and I guess because can't really tell what's going on from the distance away, because we were in the end zone, so we really couldn't see the coin flip as well. But it felt like I thought I had hit like one of the Army players, so I was like, that's weird. Like, you're hitting the Army player, but whatever. It just sticks out because it was like we were in so many overtime games, and in the beginning of so many other games, that never happened. So it's like the one time that you're like, let's see if we can win the coin toss. Let's see if we can, either get on defense first or, whatever, however Trailer wants to play it. And then you hear this bing, and you're like, oh, okay, what's going on here? Things are going awry here in West Point.
Yeah, one of the other things that just kind of sticks out overall from the season to me is just the incredible plays by Brendan Brady that were not running back plays. I think, again, he had some great moments in terms of like actually playing running back.
Yeah.
But when I think back to this season with Brendan Brady, you think about the fact that he had 2 incredible punts. How many times do you see a running back punt the ball? He had a pass for a touchdown. I mean, he tackled someone on an interception. I mean, he pretty much was like you mentioned before, the Swiss Army knife. He kind of did it all this season.
The punts were Lucas Dean-esque.
Yeah.
And the quality. And I would say that pass was Frank Harris-esque. I mean, you're right. It was like Brady's going out there and doing all these things, but it's like mimicking the talent of who he's actually replacing within those plays. So yeah, I mean, it was good to see him. Glad he came back, and then that he was able to actually contribute in those ways.
Yeah, and contribute in ways that no one would have really anticipated at the beginning of the season, because we'd seen him involved, obviously, in like a trick play before.
Right.
But yeah, it just seemed like he had a really great season. Ended too soon, obviously, with the injury, but I hope that he looks back on the season fondly and like remembers all those kind of interesting points.
Sure. Let's talk though about, I think, what I thought was going to be your number one memory from this season, because it felt like to me that that's the one that stuck out to you the most and got you all giddy from then on. It was UAB, Tate Sandell, and his onside kick recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to see kind of the personality of Tate Sandell and perhaps the future of special teams. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of him in the 2023 season.
I'm telling you, everybody, she's going to have a Sandell shirt on and wearing it at those games.
Absolutely.
She's not going to be related to Sandell, but she's wearing it because she wants to see those theatrics.
I'll totally own it when somebody asks me if that's my kid. Whatever.
Certainly something that happened to us when we were in West Point. So things kind of, I think, tie together a little bit. But, one thing that seems to tie together is just Frank and Oscar. We talked about Houston, where there was he makes a catch there. He makes another great catch against UNT. And then against UTEP, Frank fumbles, and the ball never hits the ground because it goes right to Oscar. Right in Oscar's hands again. Those two, I hope for next season that they have much more of a connection, because, or are able to see much more of their connection, because you just see both of the players know exactly where each is going to be, what they're going to do, and they both come through for each other. And so let's see what happens in 2023. But man, that looks like it's going to be a fun pairing.
Yeah, I mean, so let's kind of talk about some of the things that happened in terms of broken records in 2022, because I think going into this season after last year, there were so many records broken. It just didn't seem like what are we going to strive for next year? And, again, we still had a couple of things that came up. If you start with special teams, the thing I think that'll stand out forever is Chris Carpenter with the first kickoff return for a touchdown. First time in program history. Who knows if we'll ever get to see something like that again. And then, of course, you had, Lucas Dean breaking his own record with a 76-yard punt. Jared Sackett coming out with the number of career goals for career field goals made. That was a mouthful.
Yeah. I mean, I think we wondered what special teams was going to be like because of the fact that there was staff shakeups, and certainly early on in the podcast season, we were talking about the fact that there were things awry because it seems like the coaching staff was off, but if we were going to guess early on that it would turn out like this, I don't think we would have ever imagined it that way. Speaking of which, the offense came out gangbusters, and pretty much was gangbusters the entire year, because they end up the most offensive yards in school history with 6,664, and then almost outscored last year's team for the most points scored in school history. Put up 515 this year. Last season's 516, which is the school record. Just fantastic job by everybody. And obviously the biggest reason why was because Frank Harris was upright and available for every single game once again.
And Frank, of course, just continues to break his own records because at this point, I think he owns almost all of them for a quarterback.
It was Coach Traylor coming in and essentially, I think, putting him in a position and Frank actually being able to hit the gym and, get stronger. And I think you've seen more of the things that everybody thought he could do early on in his career, but now he actually does it because now he's stronger and is much more experienced than he was, 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, and so Kari Franklin owns the single season record in receptions and touchdowns and continues to have the FBS record for the most pass caught in 46 consecutive games.
We talk about the big three, talk about how important they are, talk about how important Frank Harris is. I'll say this, we forget about, some of the things that happened with some of the other players that didn't break records, but you get Kavorian Barnes kind of busting out. You've got, Chris Carpenter having a very good game in the bowl game. So, there's still some guys out there that are going to contribute, and it's going to be fun to see if they're able to challenge some of these records. I don't know if it'll happen because, it's tough to have as dynamic a quarterback as you have with Frank Harris and be able to break those records. So, let's see if we can find a pretty good quarterback after Frank and see if, some of these guys actually challenge the record book.
Yeah, and then, on the defense side, we saw Trey Moore break Marcus Davenport's single season record for tackles for loss, recording 18 across this 14-game season. The previous record was 17.5. Clifford Chapman, we mentioned him before, with the single season interception record at 5, and the school record for most interceptions in a row. Dadrian Taylor has a school record for 3 career interceptions returned for touchdowns. I mean, we could go on and on.
Yeah, these guys are just getting put in pretty good positions, and they're also pretty athletic. Again, Conference USA helps in this manner because there are some bad teams in there, so you can stack up some stats. But even so, Trey Moore's the one that kind of sticks out to me here with that record because he was really a monster against, a good Troy team in the bowl, and that's what helped propel him to break that record. So certainly, I think we see some big things coming for him in the future. So hopefully, I'll knock on wood, but hopefully NIL doesn't come calling from another team,
right?
And he decides he wants to take his talents elsewhere. So,
well, going into this season, one of the things that we were asking ourselves was, could Traylor avoid the 3-year slump and sustain success? As I've mentioned before, the 3rd year of FBS for our previous coaches, both Coker and Wilson, were not the best, and were kind of a turning point in their careers with UTSA. But fortunately, Traylor had a very different story, and it looks like his trajectory with UTSA is on a very different track.
Yeah, and it's really the foundation that they've laid down. I would say with Coker and with Wilson, we've talked about this a lot too. They never really built a culture that you could really kind of point to. Whereas with Traylor, he from day one has been talking about this culture and has really been, pushing it. And because of it, we've also said it, from time to time, lean into your culture. That's what you need to in times of adversity. And they did this season, and because of it, that's really why I think, once again, you exceed expectations this year because of the fact that, they leaned into it and they keep talking about it and they keep ingraining it. And even the new guys that come in are just like, we just want to come in and play for a coach that will listen to us. And, you can see it on the field that there's a joy. There's certainly something that they're wanting to play for.
Well, let's talk about what we actually got right coming into the season.
All right.
There were a couple of things, not a lot, but there were a couple of things. The one thing that I really was hoping we would accomplish, and we did, was we finally beat the Texas trio, UTEP, North Texas, and Rice, for the first time and basically last attempt at that. So I think that was an accomplishment that it was kind of surprising we hadn't already achieved at some point, but, something that was good to finally see us, dominate those Texas teams.
Well, North Texas was always the problem because North Texas was always why, what spoiled the wins over all the Texas trio. So to get them beat and then, mid-season and then, you knew you could roll over Rice. it was like, well, we'll be able to roll over UTEP, but then there was that big UTEP comeback, and
Right.
it happened on the same weekend as the previous year when had that letdown against North Texas. So it was certainly surprising, but again, you could tell UTSA was the better team, and they just finished off UTEP. I don't know. I mean, I guess it is cool to read the Texas Trio, but it was almost like it was just sort of we finally got over that hump to say we're the best Texas team in G5.
Absolutely.
With those threes, I guess I should say, because we did lose to Houston, so but,
and Texas, but whatever.
Well, G5, so
yeah. But the way that we beat UTEP, I guess we'll probably remember for a very long time, because I'm hoping that we don't have a come from behind, where we're in a hole of more than 24 points at any point in the near future.
Yeah.
We thought 21 was going to be, a lot to overcome from the Memphis game, and then this year to get to down 24 points, have to overcome that. Hopefully that's the biggest point deficit we see.
I mean, I guess in this game, like I said, there was still the sort of UTSA can out athlete anybody in Conference USA.
Right.
In Memphis last season was a little different because Memphis made mistakes. And I don't know that I could say that UTEP made a lot of UTEP had to play the game of their life for them to actually get up 24 points on us.
Right.
Whereas Memphis didn't feel like they had to. They're a pretty good team, and I think was just the first shot at, oh, this is what playing in the AAC, like a mid-tier AAC team is going to be like. So we need to match that type of speed. We need to match that type of execution. UTEP, yeah. I'll leave him alone.
Well, going into the season, the other question we really had was, could we get out of our out-of-conference schedule without sustaining significant injuries? And unfortunately, that did not turn out to be the case. After that Texas game, I think we had already sustained 21 injuries to that point in the season. From that game, previous games, fall camp. So, injuries really turned out to be kind of the discussion point of the season for UTSA.
For everybody that, and when I say everybody, for those UTSA fans that are like, oh, UTSA can make it into Big 12 and can hang with Big 12, I don't think so. Not yet. There's still a lot of team building that needs to occur, but I mean, Traylor essentially had to wave the white flag against Texas because of the fact that so many guys were going down. And, going back to what you just said, that was the fear going into the Texas game was how many guys are going to get hurt. More importantly, is it going to happen on the line, and how does that affect Frank? Because the last thing you want to do is face a Big 12 team, no matter who it is, a Big 12 team without like a decent protection for Frank, because that means that Frank's health is now in danger too.
Right.
I mean, he waved the white flag because he knew if I don't do it now, we're going to lose the season because Frank's going to get hurt. So, yeah, definitely disappointing, but I mean, I think it was... They got through it, so I guess that's all that matters.
I mean, we have really achieved that next man up, mentality time and time and
time
again.
They had to. I mean, they just have to.
and at some point, we just hope that we can get through a healthy season. But we'll talk about next year's out of conference schedule in a little bit.
Okay.
So what we got wrong? Well, there was plenty, but fortunately, the things that we got wrong, I'm glad to say that we got wrong. For example, our prediction, our first early prediction of the season, you had 7-5, and I had 8-4 for the season. Then, we got a little more optimistic after we saw, how things. We got more optimistic after we kind of saw things how they shook out with Conference USA and some of the teams leaving and coaches leaving. And then in the fall, we were both really at a 9-3 season, 10-4 with winning a bowl and championship game. So a little bit off, 10-4 was where we were ultimately. We ended up 11-3, but happy to be wrong about that.
Well, again, we really thought that we were going to lose a game in Conference USA that we shouldn't lose, and it almost came true at the end of the season against
Right.
UTEP. And there was obviously other games where we thought we might lose as well. In terms of really UAB, I think is the one that we wanted to point to because they were the ones that were they were a good team in Conference USA, and they were the team that was supposed to challenge UTSA for conference supremacy. So it was surprising that when they started kind of falling apart, and really it was their loss of their quarterback that kind of prompted their downfall. But for the most part, like, was there anybody else in Conference USA that was really going to challenge UTSA? No. They were going to have fun trying, but they weren't going to actually get it done. But I really thought that we were going to run over UAB, and it just, they came back, and we kind of fell apart.
One of our other overtime games.
Yeah. Coming back and doing this review is just kind of interesting because, as you start talking through things, you start realizing, wow, there was a hold your breath moment there. There was another hold your breath moment there. And it's like, you want to romanticize it. Oh, we really blew through Conference USA. Didn't. And you know that in the back of your mind. But you still felt like there should have been a little bit more of a cushion between UTSA and the rest of Conference USA.
Right. We also thought we were going to see less 12 personnel this season. But with all of the injuries on the offensive line, that just wasn't possible.
Well, Mekhi Hart goes down, in the sixth play of the game against Houston. So that was one of the things we brought up during the position review, which was offensive line health. It was, can they stay healthy, and are they actually pretty good? I mean, I think they're a fine group, but Mekhi Hart going down 6 plays into it started challenging that depth, and then you play essentially a lot of your non-conference schedule, and certainly some of the early conference schedule, with your third string walk-on offensive tackle. That's a credit to the coaching staff to getting them ready, but most importantly, it's the lack of, I would say, talent that went up against us that they couldn't take advantage of that.
Right.
The scheming took really changed that, and it took the tight ends really essentially staying in to help block. So once we started seeing actually the offensive line get healthy by the end of the year, especially against Troy, and I would say later in the second half of the season, you got to see Oscar go out for more pass routes. You started seeing Dan Dishman kind of taking some, getting some more opportunities to go out for some pass catching routes. So it really changed the way this offense could roll, and I think shows a little bit more of what Traylor really wants to be shown on a week-to-week basis.
All right, well, let's dig in to the offense a little bit since we're on the topic of the offensive line. And
well, I mean, I think the most surprising thing again was Frankie Martinez having to play. Obviously, he steps up at a moment when maybe he could have faltered, but he also got helped out by his team, and none of them really flinched. And I think that was to me that was huge for this team, is that Frank didn't seem at all bothered by the fact that Frankie Martinez is guarding his blind side. He could have been affected by it and been worried about it more than,
right.
And really kind of had issues dealing with it during games. But, and maybe I'm romanticizing it, but it felt like he just played same old Frank,
right?
And at the highest level of what Frank can do. So, that takes a special player to do that, but also a special leader. And again, I think I've talked about plenty of times about just how great of a leader Frank Harris is, and I think this showed it. But then to have essentially a defensive lineman during the season switch to become an offensive tackle and then play at a very high level again,
right.
Walker Beatty. This team, again, you've talked about the adversity, but I think I think a lot of it has to do with Traylor, but I think for me, as I'm realizing it more and more, is that a lot of it has to do with Frank Harris too. I think it's his belief in his teammates and in the way he handles the offense and the way he, I think, just leads in general. That I think that's why these guys come in and they just fill their roles.
Right. On the running back side, we spent a lot of time talking in the off season about depth at the running back position. What was that going to look like? We were feeling really good at the beginning of the year with Brendan Brady and Traylon Smith coming in. little did we know that we would have, injuries with Treylon, and not really get to see all of his talent. Brendan Brady really took the bulk of the carries through the first part of the season, and then all of a sudden, Kavorian Barnes kind of came out of nowhere and ends up with, just really an absolutely stellar season.
He absolutely did. And, that was the thing, is that you talked about, we began the season with Brendan and Treylon, neither of which we saw by the last two games of the season. And that's just incredible, is the fact that how did we get through it? And it was really a testament to Kavorian being able to step in and really pass block well, which he did, and really inject this spark plug into this offense that I guess I would say that neither Treylon nor Brendan Brady possessed. I mean, he's physical. We've talked about it many times on our podcast episodes about how physical he is. But that speed and that jolt that he has, it's just different.
Yeah.
And, I think that's just going to be exciting to see what he can do over the next few seasons.
And as long as somebody reminds him that his job is not to tackle when he's carrying the ball, and teaches him how to hurdle defenders instead of, smacking them, I think he's going to have a pretty impressive career. And who knows, he could go down in history as one of our best running backs.
Yeah, I mean, he's already beginning to etch his name as one of the best running backs in school history, just with this one season alone, because there was plenty of special moments against plenty of pretty good teams. So, I mean, Troy's a very good defense, and he had a very good game against Troy. So, it wasn't just against, putting up, 300 yards against Rice or 300 yards against, some of the worst teams in Conference USA. It was, he stepped up big against good teams.
Right.
Let's talk about the wide receivers, tight ends. I mean, I don't think there's really a lot to say here aside from they were exactly what we thought they were going to be.
Absolutely.
You've got Oscar and the big three, the four main pass catching threats, and that's exactly what they were. They were dangerous, they were terrific, and they were almost always on sync with Frank whenever he needed it. Whenever Frank was, needed somebody to bail him out, all four of those guys stepped up at some point during the season. So let's take us now to the quarterbacks. And really, there's not much to talk about here aside from, really just saying that, A, Frank is back, and 2, he just had another stellar season. I mean, I think this is the level that I think people thought he was at 2, maybe even 3 years ago, but he was nowhere near that. He still needed to get stronger. He still needed to really trust his blockers. And I said earlier that, he seems to inject this kind of leadership and confidence in his linemen. And last season, after the bowl game, I kept saying, I want to see Frank being able to be in the pocket and be able to really pass from the pocket, because we'll see a better Frank Harris from that. And I thought we did. Mm-hmm. I thought there was more. He was in the pocket more. He didn't have to roll out a lot. And I thought he really showed just how much of a progression he's made in terms of his level at quarterback. And because of it, you also saw some much better passes from him. A lot of times, I would say, even in 2021, there were times that, he would kind of start moving around and he would bail out on the play and he would just try to throw it downfield and he wouldn't have a lot to it. This season was different. He would step up in the pocket and he would just unleash, and you'd be like, all right, now he gets it. Now he understands what, if he had known 2 seasons ago, this could have gone to a different level. I'm not going to criticize him for that. I'm actually going to be saying, applaud him more for he realized what those deficiencies were 2 years ago, and now look where he's at.
Right.
I mean, he's just incredible. So you want to take us to the defense?
Yeah, I mean, the defensive line was one of the position groups at the beginning of the season that we said we had the least questions about, and turned out that was right. We definitely saw stellar play from the defensive line throughout the season. Joe Evans was an amazing addition to the team.
Quiet guy, but just so solid. Like, we missed him when he got injured.
Right.
And but one guy that, of course, I have a soft spot for, and that we will miss for next season is Lamont McDougal.
Absolutely.
Fiery dude. He's got the freaking goggles that I love that he plays with. But man, him and Joe Evans were just so solid in their positions. And that's not to diminish anything any of the other defensive linemen did. It's just these guys were just consistently good.
Right.
We can't forget about talking about Nick Booker Brown, too. A guy that kind of popped out of nowhere.
Right.
A walk-on.
Yeah. Hopefully he gets a scholarship over the offseason. Certainly deserves that.
Yeah, I mean, and he has been so stellar, I'd say, in terms of being more of a dynamic threat on the defensive line. But that kind of brings us to the linebackers, where we saw, I would say, the usual Ligon-Harmonson duo in the middle, but we were wondering what's going to happen on the outside.
Right.
We knew Dadrian was going to be there, so we were like, okay, well, we should be all right there. But who steps up in the Clarence Hicks role? I give you Trey Moore.
I mean, it was just amazing to see the emergence of Trey Moore this season.
And he's essentially a hometown boy, which makes it even that much better. Like, you hear Traylor talk about how he wants to keep all these guys here, and I get it. And there's, we'll talk about the fact that there's, players that don't want to stay home, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they just don't want to stay home. They want to go somewhere else for college. The fact that we're able to luck out and get Trey Moore and then able to utilize him in a role that just shows how outstanding he is. Again, Trey Moore, Kavorian Barnes, there's some players coming in. They're going to be fun to watch over the next few seasons.
Yeah, one of the positions we had a question mark at going into the season was quarterback, knowing that we were, bringing in some guys from the transfer portal. But Nick Troy Fortune turned out to be as advertised. And, of course, Corey Mayfield, we knew that he was great. We knew he'd have a great season. But, really between those two, I think we definitely had a very solid position group there.
Yeah, and I think that's more than anything that helped the pass rush, because the pass rush in the beginning of the season wasn't getting there. And really it was because you're playing some better teams. In the second half of the season, you didn't play as good of a team. So, the pass rush really, I think, blossomed at that point. Nick Troy and Corey really did just a fantastic job, and I would really just want to point out more of Corey, just where he started from, just getting feeling like he's always getting burned back in 2019, and to see us watch him come into this season, not really too worried. I kept thinking Corey Mayfield's he's the guy. He's just been so steady, and I mean he was just that and more this season. When we needed a big play, there were times where Corey Mayfield was right in the mix, and that was, I think, the weird part was, looking for that opportunity is like, how can we get Corey Mayfield to make a play here? Because we need something big.
Yeah, I thought one of the interesting moments for Corey this season was when he made the comment about how one of the coaches at UAB had complimented him after the game from having criticized Corey apparently the first time that we played UAB, Corey's freshman year or redshirt freshman year, to the point where, this coach really felt the need to come over and really compliment him on his growth and development. And then, he ends the season with the single season school record for 16 passes defended. So
I don't know why teams thought they could just throw on Corey, but they tried and they weren't always successful. So
yeah,
I think we loved what we saw out of Nick Troy Fortune and Corey Mayfield. Both I think played well. Corey obviously having, I think, a bigger season. The safety zone had a question mark once Rashad went down. Rashad goes down, and their question is who's going to step up. And your boy Kelechi, I thought, had a good rest of the season once he took over for. I'd say once he took over for Rashad, and then I think really realized his role. I thought he really complimented Clifford Chapman well.
Yeah, and I think Clifford Chapman had the season that we were expecting him to have after Rashad went down. It was like that was the expectation that we had for Clifford when we signed him, and we just hadn't really seen that level of play from him.
Some of that, I mean, obviously, again, like I said before, was, you played some weaker teams in the second half, but the other part is just because you play the weaker teams doesn't mean that you have to play down to that level. And
Right.
Clifford certainly upped his play. And I think just it was really sort of, like I said, at one point he was like the sheriff back there. And him and Kalechi were really, I thought, really did a great job in the back end of the secondary. And, obviously they had their mistakes, but this is a tough time to be playing essentially secondary in college football. Any touch of a wide receiver and you're essentially going to get flagged for something.
Right.
So, I thought these guys were terrific. And, obviously you have Rashad coming back at some point, but there's also some young guys that are coming up and, hopefully they get in the mix and we'll be talking about them about this time next season.
Yeah, so let's talk about special teams. Again, we already talked about all of the records that they broke at the beginning. But again, just a really consistent season from special teams. I think overall, we had questions at the beginning of the season about Burke and his leadership, over as a special teams coordinator. But by the end of the season, I felt like special teams was really where we needed it to be. And we weren't having those big issues on kick coverage. We were seeing, again, always consistency from Lucas Dean, but Sackett really seemed to kind of come into his own at the end of the season. And then we didn't have to worry about ball handling on our punt returns and our kickoff returns this season like we have in the past.
It was steady. It was, absolutely steady. I don't think we fumbled at all this season on any sort of kick return. So, yeah, absolutely huge. But I think it was just the change of getting Josh Cephas back there, getting Chris Carpenter back there, and just having guys that are used to essentially, handling the ball and being really good at it. I thought Deidre Taylor was going to be back there a little bit more, but it turned out these two guys were the guys, and Chris Carpenter essentially became the returner by the end of the season. And great experience for him. Great chance for him to show what he can do in a UTSA Roadrunner uniform.
You want to talk about coaching?
Yeah, I think, look, you have to talk about the fact that, this had to be probably Traylor's best coaching job since he's been here, because of all of the adversity, all of the injuries, everything that they navigated. You could call out Matt Maddox and other Coach Traylor for the offensive line work that they did throughout the year. Again, I've already lauded Frank Harris for what he did in terms of his leadership. And, I think that has had part of it to do with, along with the coaching and them having players ready. Obviously I criticized Just Lepter in the middle of the season and said, should we move on? I think, there's some other questions we're going to have about him a little bit later. But, honestly, I thought that the coaching staff did what they needed to do. And, they just had the players ready to play. And it's easy to say over and over, next man up, next man up. You hear it from every single team in college football. But I'd say that what this coaching staff really did well was making sure that those guys were prepared. And that's why it was like, I understand UTSA fans getting a little antsy about like, oh man, we're going to have this guy in now. Oh man, we're going to have this guy. But the coaching staff has always had them prepared. And it just, you've talked about this being like the good old days, like, before it becomes like tough days, right? These are the good old days with our coaching staff as well, because this group of coaches has these guys it really put them in a position to succeed. And that's all you really ask from them. And the record shows it again, just for itself. We could obviously nitpick a little bit more on coaching, but do you have anything that you think that you would want to nitpick or you want to at least shout out for any of the coaches?
No, I think, again, it's a testament to our coaching staff that once again we have P5 programs coming and looking at our coaching staff. Unfortunately we lost Will Stein, but that's what happens when you have a really great coaching staff and a young coaching staff in a lot of these key positions. You're going to see them move on to bigger and better jobs. And it's unfortunate for us as UTSA fans, but it overall means that our program is heading in the right direction and that Traylor is, identifying the right talent.
I think that's the key there. The last thing you said is him identifying the right coaches for the right moment. And, as much as we can criticize some of these coaches for some of the stuff they do, let's be honest. I mean,
You can criticize any coach
yeah.
for anything, you know?
So, I think we're done here in terms of the recap.
Yeah, I think, again, what you said a few minutes ago, got to remember this and reflect on it as we look back on the season. We are in the good old days. You know, we're going to start talking about 2023 and the AAC, and the road's going to get a little bit harder. So enjoy the second special season that we had. Well, let's turn our sights now to 2023 and talk about who we think we're going to have on the roster for next year.
Okay.
So it looks like we may have as many as 15 super seniors. The ones that we know about or that are confirmed, if you will, either because they didn't take part in senior day or they announced that they were coming back. We have 9 that are confirmed: Trumaine Bell, Josh Cephas, JT Clark, Nick Troy Fortune, Frank Harris, of course, Makai Hart, Brandon Matterson, Tyke Ogle Kellogg, and Rashad. And then we have 6 more that we haven't heard that they're leaving, so I'm just going to say I'm assuming that they're coming back. Ernesto Almaraz, Lucas Dean, Zachary Franklin, Kalechi Wachiku, Kyle Wakefield, and Cameron Wilkins. Again, some of those guys may be leaving and just haven't said anything, or, you know, perhaps based on their role, they might not come back, but we kind of assume those are going to be the 15 super seniors we have. In the transfer portal right now, we have Ty Edwards. Not a surprise. I mean, I think we expected him to go in the transfer portal.
Right.
Xavier Player, Cade Holt. I'd expect to see some more as we kind of free up some roster space over either the next couple of weeks or certainly by the end of the spring season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's some other guys that are probably going to find out from the coaching staff, hey, you're not going to get this amount of playing time, so here's what we want you guys, essentially, I don't want to say push them out, but at the very high say, if you want to stay here, great, but, here's what your outlook looks like.
Right. We had early signing day recently. We actually signed more people in this early signing day than I think we really anticipated to see. There were quite a few players signed in the early signing period. Right now, we're sitting at the top G5 class, and 6 of UTSA's top 10 recruits are in this class. So just a couple of notable names. We'll come back and talk about signing day in February, but a few names to keep your eye on. Owen McCown, quarterback transfer from Colorado. Former NFL quarterback Josh McCown's son. He left Colorado after the coaching change. Left-handed, very similar to Frank. Someone that people anticipated might have signed last year, but instead went to Colorado. So it'll be interesting to see him on the roster next year and see if we get to see him in some reps.
Yeah.
We also have Jackson Gilkey, who is the highest rated quarterback UTSA assigned out of high school. Cam Alexander is a cornerback transfer from Sam Houston State, so he's someone that we should see in the mix for some playing time, perhaps to replace Corey Mayfield. And then our highest recruit in this class overall, I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong, Daniel Oganapi. He's an offensive tackle from JUCO out of Iowa Central Community College. Again, he's our highest rated overall recruit in program history. Originally signed with Old Dominion and then went to JUCO route. Be interesting to see, if he's in the mix at the beginning of the season.
I mean, I think with any of these offensive linemen, you might as well put him in the mix and just let those battles kind of play out. And really, I think, give Frank a chance to figure out who he's also comfortable with being in that starting lineup.
Yeah, there were a number of running backs that were signed in the class as well. A transfer out of Vanderbilt. So, it looks like they really put a lot of focus on trying to build up some more depth at that position, because obviously we thought we had depth this year and didn't end up happening. But I think the one position we're all still kind of waiting to see signed is the safety position.
Certainly, it's kind of interesting that we still haven't signed anybody. But maybe there's just some things in the works that obviously they haven't been able to get commitments yet. But at least good to see that some of the other positions that where we were hurting at and where we were going to need some more players are getting filled.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect to see somebody from the transfer portal for safety. I'm assuming to replace Clifford Chapman. I mean, if you look at Kelechi potentially coming back to back up Rashad. Kelechi and Rashad really play that same free safety position. Or is it strong
safety?
Yeah. They both play the strong safety. I always get those mixed up. So we're going to need somebody, to play the free safety, and I'm not sure whether or not Kelechi would really be able to kind of step into that role. I would anticipate that they'd see maybe bringing in someone else, with some playing experience. But
Agreed.
And then since signing day, we've signed another JUCO wide receiver. So it seems like our wide receiver room is going to be pretty strong too. But again, when we come back in February, we can kind of recap all of these positions and know for sure what our roster is going to look, or a little more closely what our roster is going to look like.
Absolutely. All right, this brings us to our fun, way too early type of questions for 2023. We call them the Beto questions. First one is, how do we compete against bigger, stronger, faster AAC teams? For me, I think competing is the easy part, and I think we would also want to define what competing means. But I think it's just going to be a little bit more difficult, in my opinion, especially in the AAC. Some of it, I don't think is going to be as difficult because you're bringing so many Conference USA teams into AAC. There has been some, coaching changes, but I don't think that those coaching changes will really affect where those rosters are at this point anyway. I just think that there's got to be something a little different that has to happen in order for UTSA to essentially stay at the top of AAC. I don't know that they're there yet, but, again, it's way too early. There's other teams in AAC that are staying that still have some sort of roster kind of shakeups as well. So it's going to be kind of interesting as we go through. Any thoughts on your end?
I mean, hands down, Tulane is going to be the favorite going into the AAC for 2023. And, just watching them and how they compete, I do think that it's going to be a challenge for UTSA. I mean, we're not going to be able to, as you've said before, out-athlete Tulane and just come in and expect to win. It's going to be more of a dogfight. We're going to have to be smarter in how we play them. We're going to have to make sure that we execute really well. So, again, with a large part of the AAC coming from Conference USA, we can kind of assume that we'll be really competitive with that group. It's going to be, how do we look at Tulane? How do we look at East Carolina? Those are going to be the schools where we shouldn't expect to walk into the AAC and be competing for the championship game.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to kind of consider going in there. It's just, especially with UTSA fans, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be something that they'll have patience with.
Right.
So let's move to this. How does Justin Burke step up and handle play calling?
I think he did fine against the Troy, or in the bowl against Troy. But, certainly I think he's got, a learning curve that we're going to need him to kind of close the gap, be a little bit more creative, make sure that he's putting Frank into good positions, because I'm sure with our out-of-conference schedule next season, we're going to be facing a lot of the same issues that we did this year in terms of injuries. We're replacing Texas with Tennessee. We still have Army and Houston from last season, and, Texas State may be better than Texas Southern, depending on, how that turnaround has gone. But, I mean, I think it's going to be a very similar scenario going into 2023, and, we need to hopefully work out some of those kinks before the first game. But we also have some other, positions that still need to be filled. We don't have a special teams coordinator, so we could see some similar issues to what we experienced in the Houston game.
Fair point. Now, I'll add that Jess Love should be thrown in here as well because he's going to have to step up his play calling. One of the things that stood out to me about this defense throughout the entire season and even before then was the fact that Clifford Chapman at the beginning of, this season said, this is a pretty easy defense. It's
easy to learn, yeah.
Yeah, pretty easy to learn. There's going to probably have to be some more complexities because you're going to have to fool these quarterbacks a little differently. So I think that more than anything is what, Justin Burke is going to be doing on the offensive side, providing a little bit more nuance. Coaching is going to matter a little bit more. And I think, to me, that there's going to be renewed aggravation with our coordinators. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's really been as much aggravation, on both sides of the ball these last two seasons. I think that it's going to happen, though, going into AAC because I think, again, to your point, there's some other teams in there that are like Tulane that play a little bit differently, and there's going to have to be something different that we have to add, really, I think, into the mix to kind of give us a chance at winning.
And you would expect that we should be able to do that on the offensive side because we are returning so many starters again. I mean, we will be a veteran team once again, especially on the offense.
Right. It's going to be the defense where I think, again, there's going to be a little bit more, I think, question marks just because, the speed's a little bit different in AAC. There's definitely many more burners in the AAC than there are as opposed to Conference USA, which now leads us to, I think the question that kind of plays into this one as well. Can we take a step to the next level and beat a ranked opponent / win a bowl game?
Yeah, I mean, that we've faced these ranked opponents either very early in the season or at the very end of the season in a bowl game. We haven't really seen that in the middle. There's a likelihood that when we face Tulane in the middle of the season, whenever we play them, because we don't know where our schedule is, they could be ranked based on how they're playing at the end of this year. So this isn't going to be kind of that anomaly of, we have a really hard out-of-conference Tennessee, and then, we just won the championship. Are we really hyped up enough to play this bowl game? I mean, we're going to start seeing teams in the middle of the season potentially that are ranked. And I think it's going to be a challenge for UTSA. We have the talent to do it. But again, it's going to take executing at a very high level, not making mistakes, and doing something a little bit different, really, and on play calling on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. And I know that, it's not really, I think, too early to say that. I think this team isn't there yet. It's struggled against ranked teams. They've teased. They've been able to, quote unquote, compete by staying within a touchdown / whatever kind of margin you want to put on there. But to your point, there's a sense of nuance, and I kind of brought this up during the bowl game, after we kind of broke that down. There's a nuance that needs to come in here, and that's coaching. How do you make those plays to beat a ranked opponent? Mm-hmm. We can be fun and be that little upstart for a while, which we have been, I think, since 2020. You can make a case of going all the way back to UTSA football's inception in 2011. But at some point, if you really want to be a quote-unquote G5 heavyweight / being on the cusp of P5, like, Coach Traylor has kind of alluded to, you're going to have to win these games, and you're going to have to do them consistently. You just haven't been able to do them yet. So what's it going to take to get there? And I think it's going to take coaching, and it's going to take, I think, the players being much more disciplined. And a lot of what you said, I think, rings true, absolutely true. But, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily coming sooner rather than later. I still think that that's maybe a season down the road, and that could sound very, I'm sure it's going to sound quite negative, but I just don't, based on what we've seen in the last two bowl games, what we've seen, in non-conference and since 2020, I just don't know that I think the narrative is still, we're not there yet.
One of my question marks for this season is not obviously who's QB1. We know that's Frank, but...
Is he?
Yeah, I think so. It's who is QB2. With Owen McCown coming in now, he's going to challenge Eddie Lee for that position. Last year we kind of talked about this, alleged battle between Cam Peters and Eddie Lee. It seems like Eddie Lee was really the clear QB2 between those two, regardless of what Traylor said. But I think we'll definitely see a battle for QB2 now between, Owen and Eddie Lee.
I mean, Owen fits in naturally because, as you said, he's left-handed. So, I think that there is something to that. I guess the question is going to be, what kind of dynamics does he show out there? And I'm not sure when he's going to enroll. If he does enroll, like, for the spring, then we'll be able to see him in the spring game, and we'll be able to give you a better look at it and say, okay, yeah, there's some pop off that hand. It's a lot like Eddie Lee that, the ball really flies off. But he's not, and there's going to be plenty of he's not Frank, because Frank's different.
Right.
What Frank lacks in some of his passing acumen, he obviously has in his running ability, and is just different with his pocket presence, right? So, that I think is going to be interesting, kind of heading and looking at these backup quarterbacks. Obviously, I think Eddie Lee's going to have the head start because he's been in the system now for a couple of seasons. So, he knows what this all entails, and,
right.
Obviously whatever Burke kind of adds a twist to, it's still not going to differ too much from the base plays they had in the bowl game / had throughout the seasons. But how does Owen kind of adapt to that? So your thoughts?
I think the advantage that Owen will have going in is the fact that he's had 3 starts, against Pac-12 teams. He played in 4 games this season. 3 of them were starts. So that kind of experience is going to give him an advantage. Again, it's a different system. It's a different play caller. But that could, elevate him in his game. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what, how those two compete with each other. And hopefully it'll make both of them better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they'll completely be better. It's just a question of who's going to actually get is it going to be this guy is the backup, or is it going to be or that sort of designation. That'll be the fun part. This
really should be Frank's last season, so one of these two should be the heir apparent. I mean, we've seen, I can't think of the guy's name, but one of these kids is getting a 9th year of eligibility, so I guess we could see an 8th year for Frank, but more than likely that's not going to be the narrative.
Weirder things have happened, yes.
Yeah. Before we go, let's talk about UTSA basketball. The men dropped their first 3 conference games to North Texas, Louisiana Tech, and UAB. Not really a great start.
No, not at all.
They had a chance against North Texas, although when you look at the score, you may not think that. But, I mean, they got within 1 point and then just absolutely went cold and struggled the rest of the second half.
It's the wash, rinse, repeat type of thing that you've seen over and over with this UTSA team for a while under Henson, and I think that's unfortunately what could lead to. Obviously, I think we're all expecting a change. Obviously, I don't think it has anything to do with Henson as a person. Obviously, We've heard so many great stories about him as a person, but you don't just keep good people around. They've got to also perform, and things just aren't happening on the men's side of the court. And going into AAC, there's going to need to be a jolt. There's going to need to be a different type of excitement, and it can't just come from opponents, kicking our butts.
Right.
So, that's obviously disappointing, but we'll move on.
On the women's side, we're now 1-1 in conference play. Again, if you look at their record, they've only won 3 games, but they've been competitive in all of these games, and they've had a shot to win. They should have beat Louisiana Tech, but they just went cold at the wrong time in the 4th quarter. Missed a lot of easy layups and shots in the paint, and Kira was just off all night. But they came back and pulled off a victory against UAB, in large part by the spark that one of the freshmen, Sienna, offered off of the bench.
It was two freshmen, actually. Sienna came off the bench and started that spark and was really... We could do a whole pod on this, but she came off the bench and hit those threes, but then was moving around so much and, kind of chasing down these balls, really hustling, both in offense and defense. She caused havoc when she went on the court. But Sydney Love, our true freshman, usually she starts games, but this one she came off the bench. She was terrific. Jordan Jenkins was saddled with foul trouble throughout the game. I don't think she played very many minutes. I mean, it could be in the... I think it's in the teens, but regardless, Sydney Love was just fantastic. Kira White, again, was off. Kira brings a lot to the table. And a lot of it's mostly... I would say most of it is playmaking. But... what Sydney Love did, hit some big shots, hit some big threes, and then at the very end of the game, she blocks what was going to be, I think the game, may have been the game tying shot. It could have just been, a regular jumper, but she was crucial throughout the game. I thought she was, had her moments when she had a couple downs, when, she made some mistakes, but she kept her head up. And with freshmen, you're going to have those kind of peaks and valleys. But what I thought with her was that she had a much more consistent performance. And I think because of that, UTSA got past getting into one of those dry spells like they did against La Tech. La Tech, I think, was really frustrating because they really did hit a point where it was like nobody was really cutting to the basket. Nobody was really moving too much. And because of it, it became so easy to defend them that they were just kind of jacking up shots. And against UAB, things were a little bit different, and again, they got hot from three-point land. Something that I wish the guys could do.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel, even though the record doesn't reflect it, I do feel like the women are moving in the right direction. Next opportunity to see them, they play on Thursday, January 5th at 6 p.m. against Middle Tennessee. So hopefully we can use this win against UAB as kind of a spark to have some more conference wins this season.
They're getting there. I think you're going to start seeing more of a rise from this women's team, much like the soccer team, where it took a few seasons to kind of get going, and now they're going to become some players in that AAC level.
Kind of in some other news with some former UTSA football players, Dadrian Taylor announced that he had accepted an invite to the Tropical Bowl. That game will be played on January 21st. So hopefully he has a good game, and that will help kind of propel his NFL draft stock. Tariq Woolen made history as the first UTSA Roadrunner to make a Pro Bowl team, and as a rookie. Pretty impressive. So we'll see him in the Pro Bowl game on February 5th.
Lots of people are really raving about Tariq, just his growth. I mean, we've been gushing about him just about all season, but it's just fun to just see him finally really put everything together and able to stay healthy and show all his talent. I think that's been the biggest key for him, is that health.
Yeah. I mean, the Seahawks are still kind of in the mix for the playoffs, but we'll definitely get to see Spencer Burford and the 49ers.
Brock Purdy.
And Brock Purdy, not a former Roadrunner, but...
a former Iowa State guy, yeah.
I gotta say, it is nice to see Brock Purdy and Spencer Burford out there together. There was a nice clip where they were asking Brock about Spencer. So it was kind of cool to see, these two teams that I've watched, Iowa State growing up, and then, obviously I'm a Roadrunner. Get to see these guys as rookies out there, playing very well and, looking for a playoff run. Clarence Hicks also announced that he was drafted by the XFL's Seattle Sea Dragons as an inside linebacker in their supplemental draft. Earlier, in an earlier draft, Hunter Duplessis was picked up by the Houston Roughnecks, so we'll have at least 2 Roadrunners in the XFL season that kicks off on February 18th. So lots of opportunities to continue to see these Roadrunners in the postseason.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Atovs.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back soon with some more basketball coverage. Hopefully we'll have some good news for our conference play for you.
Well, from the women's side, right? Birds up.